forget about them. Whew. I love kids. My child would cry every time we would take him, our first child, take him to the nursery. He would just cry and cry. He'd throw this fit. He would scream like, "Don't you love me anymore?" Things like that. Kids are great. We kept leaving him. Next thing you knew, he was on his own totally. Now he lives by himself. He still cries, but but it's nice. Everybody in New York City cries, I think. So we are in chapter 18, which actually brings us to the end of a section that we had in Revelation that was describing the tribulation period. We started in chapter 6, and now through the end of chapter 18, all of that goes with the tribulation. And now John is told to describe, and he's shown the destruction of a commercial system, of an economic system called Babylon, which kind of symbolizes that this is coming to an end. This is all coming to an end. All of this this political system and world system and leadership and economic system will all come to its own destruction. And there's no really reason in our text for us to think of Babylon as being anything but a literal city of Babylon. We have it called a city. It's called a city in our text 5 different times. It is a historical city. You say, well, Babylon doesn't exist today. Nobody flies into Babylon, and, it's not a city. It's not a major thing. It's also not the end of the world. It's not Jerusalem doesn't now have operating control over the temple. Don't have a temple built yet, but it does talk about in Revelation about the temple. So when we talk about Babylon and we talk about what it means, Babylon is a real place, but it also has meaning beyond the real place. Wall Street is a real street. Wall Street is a place in New York City, a very small geographical location, and yet still has magnitudes of meaning that go along with the economic system, not just the street, Wall Street. So Babylon, likewise, throughout history has been has had a meaning of a particular economic system, commercial system that originated in the geographical city of Babylon. Much like last week when we were in chapter 17, the religious system that has permeated our world started in Babylon. So chapter 17 dealt more with the religious situation going on and the religious control at the end of the world, as well as now in chapter 18 talking about the economic, the commercial system of the world. And Babylon is the headquarters for both of those systems, and that city is literally burned to the ground in a day, in an hour, and it is destroyed. The dangers of Babylon we talked about back in chapter 14 and verse 8, and then chapter 16 and verses 19 through 21. That's when Babylon was introduced to us as a wreck, as a terrible system. And Babylon was kind of the bedrock of a humanistic way of thinking about God or a religion in general, and also was a way of thinking of yourself. It's a humanistic system altogether, so that even in the commercial aspect, the foundations of the commercial aspect of our world go back to Babylon. So maybe the literal city of Babylon is going to be rebuilt, but it's going to suffer a final destruction at the end of the tribulation, at the end of this time that we're talking about. But in view here is much more than just the city. It's what it stood for. It's what it promoted throughout its history. It's what is namely a satanic system of world thinking. Every form of being humanistic. The humans are the main thing, not God. Forget God. It's an idolatrous humanism. The first 3 verses I want to read together where this announcement is made, an angelic announcement. is made for all and for John to understand. It says in verse 1, "After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, 'Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living.'" So he says another angel, and he uses the word allos instead of heteros. It's not another angel of a different kind. It's another angel of the same kind. The same kind as back in chapter 17 and verse 1. Another strong angel. So this angel announces the next part of John's vision. And the angel possesses great authority. He's got great splendor associated with him. Probably indicative of the type of judgment that he's about to give. And what John writes about this angel says that the earth was illumined from his glory. And that phrase alone has led many people to think that this must be speaking of Jesus Christ. This must be the angel Jesus Christ, not just an angel, but Christ himself, because who would have that kind of glory? But this messenger is associated with one of the same kind, one of another angel. In the very beginning, he's called another angel. And he performs the things that angels do, and he has great authority in the things that he is doing. And his great authority that he has illuminates the earth, probably suggesting that he has just come from God's presence. He's coming from heaven, from the presence of God, to deliver this message, this warning, basically. And when we compare what we just are reading here with chapter 16, where we left off with the bold judgments that are giving out, in chapter 16, verses 17 and 8 through 19, actually, this would probably mean that this is happening with the pouring out of the seventh bowl, pouring out of the last judgment, that this angel comes and gives this warning. Then in verse 2, the repetition of the word fallen is this Babylon the Great, indicates that it is a certain thing, that God has already determined Babylon's fall. So ancient Babylon fell to Cyrus the Persian back in 539 BC, but not all of the things that were said about Babylon's fall have taken place. And so Babylon is going to rise to a great level of idolatry, of luxury. Babylon is also going to be utterly destroyed, completely destroyed. The political system, the commercial system, all of it. All that originated in Babylon. Everything that says we can do this on our own, we leave God out. We can build the tower. We can make a name for ourselves. We can be great. We can be amazing. And all that they were doing, all that Babylon has done, has influenced the nations, our text tells us here. They've all acted immorally. They've all grown rich at the expense of other people. And Babylon's commercial, economic influence, it's been worldwide. It has affected the entire earth. And these political self-interests, these I'm doing it for me, it's about materialism. It's about being great in that way. These are some of the biggest sins ever. So why is God going to judge Babylon? In verse 3, it says he's going to judge her because she's had a corrupting influence on the world. She's become a dwelling place for demons. It was actually in the area of Babylon, the Euphrates River, where 200 million bound demons were released with the sixth trumpet. If you go back to chapter 9 and verses 13 through 16. Released from that abyss. It says there in our text here that these unclean birds, these beasts, they gather there. They're waiting for the destruction of Babylon. They're waiting as birds of prey, as beasts of prey, to feast on the death and the destruction of that city. But another reason for Babylon's judgment is that these kings have fornicated with her. They have gathered into the terrible mindset and the terrible activities of Babylon. And the whole business of Babylon was immoral business. You can think to yourself about immorality becoming a money-making adventure. Of course it is. It is today. I think the pornography industry has created a huge revenue, and it gets bigger and bigger. But this city, this Babylon, is going to be destroyed for another reason. It says that the merchants of the earth shared in her excessive wealth. They cashed in on all the immorality, all the sins and passions and greed. They cashed in on it. They made out like demons here. And like ancient Babylon, back in Daniel chapter 5, they're going to be partying all the way up until the end, till their final destruction. It is immoral activity of Babylon. So when we get to verses 4 through 8, God sends a message to his own people. There's an angelic message saying, if you're not part of this, if this isn't your mindset, get out of there, because it's going to be destroyed. Look at verse 4. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Pay her back as she herself has paid back others, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double portion for her in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived in luxury, so give her a like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, I sit as a queen. I am no widow, and mourning I shall never see. For this reason, her plagues will come in a single day, death and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. For mighty is the Lord God who has judged her. So this other voice could be an angelic voice, could be God himself, could be Christ. But there's this voice that announces that those who are not part of this Babylonian system, don't have that mindset, they need to separate from that system. They need to pull away from that. This city that symbolizes sin and greed needs to be something that they move out away from, that they do not get caught into her judgment. And he calls on God's people to leave Babylon and to forsake all of the idolatry and the things, the self-sufficiency. We don't need God, the living in the realm of luxury. Leave all of that. Everything that city represents, you need to get out of there. And so these who are to leave, those are the faithful ones during the tribulation. And they need to leave Babylon because judgment is coming upon her. Babylon has exhausted God's patience. It is time for judgment now. And the warning is those who should not be part of this judgment need to leave. So God, here at the end of that text, as he judges here, he says God is just. He's got to judge Babylon. He's a perfect God. He's a holy God. Judgment is going to have to take place. There in verses 6 and 7, the angel calls on God, or however this voice is given, to do a payback on Babylon, to pay them back for all the wicked things that they've been responsible for, that Babylon has initiated. Babylon is the mother of harlotry, it said back in chapter 17. All these things that Babylon has done, she needs to be paid back, and paid back double. And that statement, being paid back double, is like being paid fully, being paid completely for what Babylon has done. Babylon has persecuted the saints. Babylon has murdered the saints. And we'll find out that in chapter 19 as well. And the cup that she has used to create hurt and harm and death for God's people will become the instrument of her own punishment. Luxurious living is one of the reasons for Babylon's judgment. She's selfish, self-glorified. She's self-sufficient. Kind of reminds us of ancient Babylon as well, where look what I have built. Look at how beautiful the gardens are here in Babylon. Look at what has taken place. Look at what I've accomplished. But Babylon is going to fall. Babylon will fall on a literal day. And that one day talks about the suddenness of Babylon's fall. Psalms talk about that suddenness, where you look at the evil, you look at what's going on, you look at those who are hurting God's people. You look at all of that in Psalm 23, or in Psalm 39, 37, I think it is actually, where it's like the grass is growing, these huge trees, these huge oak trees, and they're just amazing and big. And God says, "Yet wait, and just in a moment, they'll be chopped down like grass. They'll be chopped down like they didn't really even exist." And you don't have to worry about retribution. Vengeance doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. And God will deal with it in a proper and right way. And that's what the cry is out here for. That Babylon, this commercial center, this religious center as well, but this commercial activity and all that they're doing will receive just retribution for what they've done. Likely, they'll be burned up with a fire that back in chapter 16 was one of the pouring out of the judgments and the earthquakes and all of the things that took place, that this is a day of burning and the city going up in smoke for Babylon. She's going to collapse suddenly. It's not going to be this gradual thing where little by little she loses her grandeur. In verses 9 through 19, we see that this judgment is lamented. It says there in verse 9, "And the kings of the earth who committed sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, 'Alas, alas, you great city, you mighty city, Babylon. For in a single hour your judgment has come.'" Verse 11, "And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple cloth, silk, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented wood, all kinds of articles of ivory, all kinds of articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, and slaves." That is, human souls. Verse 14, "The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendors are lost to you, never to be found again. And the merchants of these wares who gained wealth from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, alas, for the great city that was clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls. For in a single hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all shipmasters and seafaring men, sailors and all whose trade is on the sea, stood afar off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning. What city was like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, for the great city, where all who had ships and sea grew rich by her wealth, for in a single hour she has been laid waste." So Babylon is destroyed. Babylon is destroyed in an hour's time. The destruction, the burning, the smoke is an indication for all these to see that it is real. This has taken place. And the three groups of people that are mourning this are the kings, there in verses 9 through 10, these merchants that we see in 11 through 13, and then again in verses 15 through 17, and these ocean-traveling people, these tradesmen, these sailors, these passengers, in verses 17, the last part of verse 17 through 19. So the world government leaders are mourning this. The kings of the earth, it says here, will mourn when they see the collapse of this system. A system that's enabled them to live luxuriously, to live in a great way. And they're committing acts of sexual immorality with Babylon. That's a way of talking about the fact that they've engaged in this Babylonianism, this idea, this whole, they bought it all hook, line, and sinker. That kind of goes along more with the sailor people. And from what we see here, fire is the main cause for the destruction of Babylon. And their misery, the smoke of Babylon is bellowing there. Their misery is because they can see that Babylon is gone. Babylon is destroyed. And Babylon's going to fall quickly. 1 hour. And these political leaders are going to mourn because they've lost their power suddenly. Suddenly all of that wealth and the power that goes along with that wealth is gone for them. So Babylon was a strong city. They say over and over again, what kind of a city was like this city? Babylon was this strong city, but the judge that's judging Babylon is stronger. God is stronger. Things that seemed indestructible and would last forever, God brings down in an hour's time. The merchants there in verse 11 and following, they also mourn this because their system is gone. Their economic system is gone. It's a death knell to their businesses and everything that they were all about. It's the collapse of an economic system that in just a moment's time, it's gone. They're unable to buy goods and unable to sell their goods. And they sorrow. They're in mourning here over the loss of their customers and their business as it is. They no longer have the prophets. They saw the prophets just burn up in smoke. And the wailing of these merchants from our text here is even greater than the politicians. The politicians have lost power. The merchants have lost all of their livelihood, of their wealth. And they bemoan the loss of people to come and buy their goods. These are the same people that had previously denied all the Christians who didn't receive the mark of the beast, denied them to ever have any buying or selling opportunity. These are the same people who would not let those who did not take the mark of the beast buy anything or sell anything, and now they are in agony. In verses 12 and 13, there's lots of goods here. 29 items are listed here. All kinds of different groups of items, things that they would buy and sell, things that were special, things that showed them to be entrenched in luxury. They loved the luxuries that they had. And they find themselves really hard to break away from this love of all these things, the love of the system that enables them to have all these things. And did you notice that human trafficking is part of their business? Human trafficking is practiced in the world today. I think it's only second in its lucrativity. It's a lucrative business to kidnap people, sell them for whatever reason, for the sex market or whatever reason they sell them. Only the drug business is bigger than the human market, the human slavery market. It's a sad thing. And apparently, that's going to be even a greater thing, even a more amazing thing, or a huge thing in the sense of Babylon and what these people deal with. The politicians are going to be grieving over their broken strength. They don't have the power anymore. These merchants, they've lost all of the luxuries. All of the things that made them big, made them wealthy, they're gone. And then in verses 17 and 18, they describe the ocean travelers, ship captains, sailors, all of these people. They also, it says in our text, they stood a distance back, probably in their boats, looking at the smoke bellowing from the city, seeing Babylon burned to the ground. And they also mourn, they also lament because of the collapse of their commercial empire. And the question they have is, what city is like this great city? What city is like Babylon? And the answer to that question when they ask it that way is, this was the greatest city. This was the most amazing city. This was the epitome of wealth and market and politics and the commercial aspect of it. This was the epitome of it. What do we have to even compare to that is their question. Babylon was the epitome of material greatness. And then in verse 19, they throw dust on their heads, symbolizing the grief. Back in the Old Testament, that's what they would do when they were just in despair, in grief. And the people did that actually back in the time of Tyre. When Tyre was destroyed, they threw dust on their heads. These ocean tradesmen, they lament, just like the politicians, just like the merchants, and they wonder to themselves, how can we ever have anything like this again? If you think about this, if you think, okay, what does that have to do with me today? Okay, well, Babylon's going to burn up and be destroyed, big deal. But I think the scripture over and over again talks to us about how do we look at the wealth of this world? How do we view the luxuries that we often have? Do we see things as it really is, or do we see things as the world wants us to see those things? Can we use all of these goods and things and buy things and sell things without getting caught up into that being the way our hearts are? Without it getting into our lives, getting into our system, getting into our bloodstream? How would you react if all of a sudden the luxuries that you've become accustomed to are all of a sudden gone? The things you just depend on, the things that are special to you, all of a sudden they're up in smoke. Would it really break your heart if those things of this earth, those things that you've grown accustomed to are gone? Or is your heart in heaven and these things don't really matter? Is your heart really fixed on Christ? That was the song that we were singing earlier, right? Jesus, my rock of salvation, my refuge, my fortress, my God, hope of the world and all nations, you are the Lord of my heart, right? And when our heart is given to the things around us, to the nice things, the luxurious things, it doesn't mean, by the way, that having things is necessarily an indication that your heart is not right. But sometimes our heart gets wrapped up in those things and it forgets who it really belongs to. Scripture tells us that you can gain the whole world. You can gain everything that the world has in it, and you can lose your own soul. So it's these luxuries that kind of give an indication of where people's hearts were, what they were thinking. In verse 20 of our text, there's rejoicing that happens in the middle of this agony. While everybody else is lamenting and mourning, and they're sad, and they're throwing dust on their heads, look what happens in verse 20. Verse 20 says, "Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her." So in contrast to these earth dwellers who are just like in agony, God's people, the ones who are here called saints and apostles and prophets, they're going to be so happy. They're going to rejoice that Babylon is destroyed. The system is gone. It is dead. It is done. And actually, as we get into chapter 19, and we'll get to there next Sunday, they break into this song in heaven. And the songs that they start to sing are a response to the invitation that we have here in this verse, in verse 20. "Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has given judgment for you against her." And those in heaven begin to rejoice. Rejoice over Babylon's fall. And what causes bitter mourning for the earth, it produces great joy in heaven. Saints are all believers. I know the Certain places like to think if you're a saint, then you have a special statue in the church or whatever. You get to, people pray to you or do whatever things they do. If you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you are a saint. And there's songs like, "Oh, when the saints go marching in," and things like that. You are a saint and you are a priest, by the way. You yourself get to go to God directly. You don't have to go and sit next to a booth and talk to somebody through a little screen. You have direct access to heaven and say, "Lord, forgive me for that. Forgive me for what I just did." But here we have these saints. We have special groups of saints, the apostles, the prophets, just saying that those who are believers, those who are in heaven, they are rejoicing because God has pronounced judgment. They are excited about this. This is the verdict that is in their favor. He's done this on their behalf. He's done this for them. And he's going to have vindicated them by punishing their oppressors. And that's exactly what they sing about in chapter 19, where we'll get to next week. If you're a spirit-filled believer, you want to glorify God. You want to give him honor and glory. You are not all about hoarding your little treasures and your little thing here and having your account and having your little chest of goodies. It's about Christ. It's about him. You're not gathering little things for yourself. There's not that burning fire in your eyes of this belongs to me. I won't even think. I won't send your minds there. But it's that greed and the greed of unbelievers to accumulate wealth for themselves, to have their little nest egg. It's resulted in all kinds of oppression and opposition to the gospel throughout the world. This is for me, and if your people get in my way, I will kill you. That's been the mantra through the years. And we get to verses 21 through 24, right at the end, and we get another announcement of judgment here. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence, and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and musicians, of flute players and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. And craftsmen of any craft will be found in you no more. And the sound of the mill will be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the great ones of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in her," this is Babylon, "was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all who have been slain on earth." Wow. So this angel takes up this big stone, this millstone, and the act of throwing this huge stone into the sea is, according to this text, it's symbolic of Babylon's fate. Just like this stone is thrown into the sea and it sinks down, Babylon is not going to rise back up. It's impossible for this huge stone to rise to the surface. This economic system that has been part of the world for all this time, it is done with. It is over. It has sunk, and it will never rise again. The millstones back in John's day, they would measure an arm's length, and they would be about a hand's breadth of these big wheels, so an arm's length in diameter, and they would weigh thousands and thousands of pounds. The whole idea of this is that this strong angel explains that this is a symbolic action. Babylon's destruction will be sudden, violent, it'll be permanent. And many things are going to end because of this destruction. We see there in verses 20, mostly in verse 22, 23. When the destruction of the system happens, look what ends in that city. The rejoicing of unbelievers in that city up until that time, happiness, it comes to an end. There's no music. no trades, no people working their jobs, no industry. It doesn't continue any longer. And where there had previously been the hubbub of business and activity and the machines working and everything going, and it was cling, 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 chick, chick, money, 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 money. And all that was going on, all of the hustle and bustle of the world, all of that is going, and it comes to a silence. Maybe you hear the embers popping, from the fire of the destruction of that city. In a moment, in a day, it's all done. It's over. And the angel says there are several reasons, 3 reasons why this devastation takes place. 2 of them we find in verse 23. Another one in verse 24. The angel says, first, these men have enriched themselves. They've enveloped themselves in pride because of Babylon's influence, and they will be judged for that. And as a result of their pride and their lifting themselves up in that way, there's a second reason. They have also, in doing that, they've seduced all nations. They've made that the way nations think, the world thinks. She deceived the nations into thinking that joy and security and honor and the meaning of life come through accumulating more material things. And everybody got that memo. Everybody said, that's what life is all about. The meaning of life is I have more things. I have to really stockpile. I have to have lots of material wealth. And she used, it says here, sorcery, witchcraft, pharmakon. It comes from the Greek word where we get pharmacy or pharmaceuticals from, to deceive and seduce the nations into following her. You say, well, does this mean that anybody that's in the business of pharmaceuticals is bad? Yeah, no, it doesn't mean that. It just means that there was this drug activity that created everybody into this stupor of understanding that this is the way to go. This is what it's all about. And there are lots of situations, even in modern days, where people are seduced, are brought to a different place because of their drug use. The third reason for Babylon's judgment we see in verse 24, it's because she killed the saints. She killed the saints. She killed the believers. And the angel states this not as something here's an accusation. I'm thinking that maybe you killed the saints. Not like that at all. It's a fact. It's a historical fact. This is what you did. This is what happened. And the responsibility for the blood of God's servants who were martyred for their testimonies for Christ, for telling the truth, the responsibility for all of that lies at the feet of this system of Babylon. Because Babylon and its satanic world system has been responsible, and here's the word it says in our text, for all the slayings of the earth. Perhaps hyperbole here in the text, but basically it says there's an enormous guilt on Babylon and this whole system for what they have done, for the murdering of God's people. And just as religious Babylon back in chapter 17 includes all forms of religion, everything that denies God, everything that's outside of God, no matter what religious system it called itself, non-Christian religions, Christian religions, apostate Christian religions, all of that comes together. In the same way, economic Babylon in chapter 18 here includes all kinds of economies. It includes capitalism, it includes socialism, it includes communism, all of it. All of it is brought together in a sense that they deny God. And Babylon is the headquarters for the Antichrist on the Euphrates River. And it's going to burn up. It'll be destroyed. So whereas believers have always been in the world, we've lived in the world, we understand the way the world thinks, we've always known that because even though we are in this world, we're not of this world. We're not supposed to be part of this world. We're not supposed to think the same way. Their thinking is, in a humanistic way, we don't need God. We can do it on our own. Look at how successful we can be. Look at how we can build our own business. Look at how we can accomplish things. And I am not saying that Christians don't have success in business and stuff like that. But it's the reason, it's the motivation for all that. Everything. What drives it? Is it selfishness? Is it greed? Is it I've got to have more of those little coins? Possessions of wealth are not the problem. The problem is the self-serving use of wealth. I am going to use this wealth for me. It's about me. It's about what I'm going to do with it. And that system, that mindset becomes so much a part of life that it can become hard for us to imagine life without it. How would I survive without that? But in this chapter, we understand that system, that understanding, that way of thinking comes to an end just before Christ returns in his second coming. That's chapter 19. Christ returns. It's not going to exist. It will no longer exist. The system began long ago for people back in Genesis 11, people who came together there on the plains of Shinar, and they wanted to make a name for themselves. They wanted to be great. They wanted to be like God. They wanted to rise up to the place of God. As Christians, we need to make sure that we are not part of a world system that denies God. Any thinking that puts us in a system like Babylon of laying up treasures on this earth. We need to be citizens of heaven, laying our treasures there. Not seeing it here in our eyes, not having that nice, whatever, those newer toys, the big stash of cash. We can't see it here, but we know it's there. And we're aware that it's stored up for us. And so this chapter really should be a challenge for us to evaluate our goals. What are our financial goals? What are my religious goals? What are the things that I'm trying to do? What are the things that seem selfish in my life? What part of my living seems like arrogant living? And following this revelation that we have here in chapter 18, when the the whole religious system goes down and the economic, financial system goes down, God gives John another vision. Chapter 19. We proceed from the Great Tribulation in chapters 16 through 18 to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And that is the climax of this book. Chapter 19 is the climax of everything that we are anticipating and waiting for. That Christ will return, and he'll return in power. So we will do that next week. We will get to the songs that they are singing, the thinking that they have. Babylon is destroyed, heaven rejoices, and Christ returns. We want to see how that takes place. So we'll be back next week for that. It's our last time in April, and then we have 3 more chapters. And what a ride, just to think about what John was shown and what he was to see and what he was to write down, what he was to report on. Gives us a clear understanding of what God is intending to do and what we can know is a certainty because God has said he's going to do it. We're going to sing another song, and then I do have some announcements for you, so don't go away. Let's sing The Secret Place. I know it might be a new song to you.